Hi, y'all. My name is JP Correjo, and I'm here to educate y'all on the Wright brothers and the story of their first flight. A couple little introduction points. Orville and Wilbur Wright were born in Dayton, Ohio, and Millville, Indiana. Orville was born on August 19th, 1871, and he passed away on January 20th, 1948. Wilbur was born on April 16th, 1866, and he passed away on May 30th of 1912 due to a heart attack. Neither one of the gentlemen went to college, but they were fascinated by toys and machinery, and more specifically, toy helicopters. This in turn led them to start their own printing press, which in turn led them to feel confident to tackle flying machinery. So, a couple of previews. I'm just going to talk about the brothers themselves, their middle lives, and the flight and its effects that it had. So, how did they go from being preachers' sons to mechanical engineers? Well, they were born to Milton Wright and Susan Comer, and like we said, they were born in Dayton, Ohio, and Millville, Indiana. Mr. Wright was of English descent, and Miss Comer was of Dutch descent. Their father, Milton, was a traveling preacher, and their mother was a stay-at-home mom, and she was known for making toys and trinkets, and specifically a toy helicopter. Their siblings were Rowland, Catherine, Otis, and Ida. Otis and Ida passed away during their infancy due to some pregnancy complications. So they moved around a lot since their father was a traveling preacher, 14 times to be exact. And Orvis was a troublemaker, and he was kicked out of school, a couple to be exact, and one time in middle school is when his mother gave him the toy helicopter, and that really sparked his machinery interest. Wilbur was the studious one. He was supposed to go to Yale, but did not end up graduating due to a horrendous hockey incident that affected him pretty bad physically, but more so mentally, and he was pretty lost at the time. And Orville ended up dropping out of high school his junior year. So Orville started the printing press back in 1889, and that is also when they started the West Side News, which was a weekly newspaper, and they realized that this was not really the best thing for them, and they got into commercial printing. And once they realized that commercial printing was not exactly for them either, they followed their dream and their passion of machinery and opened up a bike shop, because the craze of bikes were also pretty big at the time. So it was called the Wright Cycle Company, and they began the production of their own bicycle in 1896. And that's when it kind of took off for them, their machinery career. They were interested in flight by Otto Lilienth, and he had created a glide machine. And there were also a couple other people who were trying to tackle flight at the time, including Samuel Langley, who had a steam-powered craft, and Octave Chanteau from Chicago, who had gliders that he had been working on. And all these people had inspired them and encouraged them to tackle their own feat. So they used a lot of resources, like I said, from previous engineers and designers to try and figure out what they did wrong. And they used a lot of ideas from early philosophers and architects, and a lot from Da Vinci. And like we said, it was a big area of discussion and a big topic at the time, so there was a lot of literature on the topic. Another place that they got a lot of their research from was from the Smithsonian. There's a lot of records of back and forth between them trying to get records. So they studied a lot of aerodynamics in preparation, and for their first glider in 1901, it's called the 1901 glider, was not a success. They did not use curved wings, and it was not sturdy whatsoever. And also they had an issue with the landing. So the next glider, Lilienthal was wrong about some of his calculations, and they figured that they needed to do their own calculations to figure out what they needed to improve. And they found that the main problems were their lift slash propulsion, and their turning issue. But in this time, they figured out a more feasible and safer way to land the vehicle. So their final product-ish was the Wright Flyer, and their main focus on that after they had conquered propulsion and turning was wings and engine, because they had figured out the proper way to do it. They just needed a good way to carry it out. So they built a wind tunnel in their shop to test their vehicles, but a main issue they kept having was the drive shaft breaking in their engine. And the first test on the Wright Flyer was December 14th, 1903, and it was not a full success. But on December 17th, 1903, at 10:35 a.m., 120 feet off the ground, and in 12 seconds, Orville traveled 6.8 miles per hour and covered about 120 feet. And they did about 3 more flights that day that all were successes. And on the third flight, on the final flight, the fourth flight, it flew over because it was not sturdy whatsoever. So that plane, the Wright Flyer, was given away to the Smithsonian and is put on display. So next flyer that they had was the Wright Flyer 2. And there were 5 people who saw this: Adam Etheridge, John Daniels, who was the photographer, Will Doe, all of the U.S. government coastal lifesaving crew, a local businessman, W.C. Brinkley, Johnny Moore, and a local teenager. And the biggest difference about this flyer was it was made more sturdy and it was longer lasting. And by this time, the world had gotten hold of what the Wright brothers were doing and were fascinated by it. So that's the story of the Wright brothers and how they got into flight and the story of their first successful flight. Thank you very much.